Let's say China.
China, 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 China. China!
China, a term Donald Trump seems obsessed with. But have you ever wondered why China is actually called China? One of the most widely accepted theories is simple and powerful. China comes from Qin, the name of the dynasty that first unified the Chinese states in 221 BCE. This theory was championed by the 19th century French sinologist Porcelain, who proposed that Sanskrit sources borrowed Qin as Qin, and that this phonetic adaptation traveled westward. Later, the famous French scholar Paul Pelliot supported this view, and the theory gained wide traction in both Western and Chinese academic circles. Even the prominent Chinese historian Zhang Xinlang agreed with this explanation. Ancient Xiongnu sources also refer to the people of the Central Plains as Qin people. Another major theory links the name China to India and Buddhism. In ancient India, the Chinese were called Chini, believed to be derived from Qin. When Buddhist scriptures were brought from India to China, monks transliterated Chini into Jina. From Sanskrit China, the name spread to other Indo-European languages. The Romans called it Sinae, the French say Xin, and in English, China. The Buddhist monk Xuanzang even wrote about the term Mahachina in his travelogue, the Great Tang Records on the Western regions, referring to Tang China from an Indian perspective. However, some scholars debate whether early Sanskrit texts like the Mahabharata or the Manusmriti were truly referring to China. Still, the term China was known in India long before the Eastern Han dynasty. In Japan, the word Shina was initially used by Buddhist monks as a scholarly reference to China based on Sanskrit sources. The Japanese monk Kukai once traveled to Tang China in 804 as part of a diplomatic mission to study Buddhist scriptures. Therefore, it can be inferred that the term Shina in his writings was learned from the Chinese translations of Buddhist texts. Later, some figures in the Buddhist community, in an effort to appear erudite and devout, also began using the term Shina to refer to China. During the Meiji Restoration, figures like Yamaga Soko believed that the outer court had been repeatedly conquered by barbarians and had thus lost its claim to civilization. Moreover, since the spring and autumn period, the outer court had seen numerous instances of usurpation and regicide, leading to frequent dynastic changes and a failure to uphold the proper relationship between ruler and subject, thereby losing the principle of Li. Therefore, he argued it was no longer worthy of being called China, the Central Kingdom. In contrast, Japan had never been invaded by barbarians and had preserved an unbroken imperial line for 2 million years, always upholding Li and righteousness. Hence, it was Japan that deserved to be called the Central Kingdom. Subsequently, people like Fukuzawa Yukichi advocated the idea of leaving Asia and joining Europe. After the Qing government's defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War, many Japanese who had long revered China as a superior civilization were both shocked and euphorically intoxicated with victory. From that point on, the term Shina began to carry a condescending tone used by the victor to belittle the vanquished. In 1913, following a proposal from the Japanese minister to China, it was officially agreed that the Japanese government would henceforth refer to China as Shina. This decision provoked widespread anger among the Chinese people. After the end of World War II, in 1946, the Japanese government issued a nationwide directive prohibiting the use of the term Shina in official documents. This was part of post-war efforts to eliminate terms that carried imperialist or derogatory connotations. Since then, Japan has officially adopted the term Chugoku to refer to China, a more neutral and respectful term that directly corresponds to the Chinese name for the country, meaning Middle Kingdom. Some believe that the word China comes from porcelain, since high-quality ceramics were exported from China for centuries. And in English, porcelain is sometimes simply called China. So, did China get its name from its famous porcelain capital, Jingdezhen? The answer is no, and here's why. Jingdezhen, while world-renowned for its porcelain, was originally called Changnan. Some speculate that Changnan might have sounded like China to European traders, But there's no solid historical or phonetic evidence for this claim. In fact, English already had a word for porcelain, porcelain, from the Italian porcellana, which means cowrie shell, because the smooth, glossy surface of porcelain resembled the shell's luster. China, however, was the first civilization in the world to produce true porcelain, dating all the way back to the Shang dynasty. By the Eastern Han, the technology matured, and by the Sui and Tang dynasties, it was perfected. Arab traders brought Chinese porcelain into the Islamic world, and from there it entered European courts, where it became a symbol of elegance and luxury. Soon, Europeans began calling it porcelain of China, or Chinaware. Eventually, they dropped the ware and simply said China. But make no mistake, the word China for porcelain comes from the country name China, not the other way around. But China is also good at making another luxury product from which people believe the name stems. That product is silk. Ancient Greeks and Romans used the term Serica, meaning the land of silk. Greek geographer even marked two places east of India, Sina and Serica. As silk flowed along the Silk Road, so did China's reputation. Over time, the words used for silk, ser, sino, and chin, blurred together across Latin, Greek, French, and English. Eventually, French Xin and English China became standard, both possibly referencing silk first and only then the place it came from. Today, Russians and many Central Asians don't call China China, but call China Kitai. This name doesn't come from the Qin dynasty, or silk, or porcelain. It comes from a nomadic empire that once stood tall on the steppe, the Khitan people. In the 10th century, the Khitan founded the Liao dynasty, ruling over vast lands in northern China. When the Jushins destroyed the northern Song and the southern Song retreated to the south, many Central Asians and Russians weren't even aware of the Song dynasty's existence. To them, the Khitan were China, so they simply used Khitan or Kitai to refer to the entire Chinese civilization. The name stuck long after the Khitan disappeared from history. But the Khitan didn't vanish quietly. After being overthrown, a Khitan prince named Yelu Dashi led his people west and founded a new empire, the Western Liao. Far from the Chinese heartland, the Western Liao built a powerful realm in Central Asia, influencing Islamic and European perceptions of the East. In 1141, Yelu Dashi refused to convert to Islam under pressure from Sultan Sanjar, the ruler of the great Seljuk Empire. This sparked the legendary Battle of Khitan on the Central Asian steppe. The Khitan-led forces crushed the Seljuk coalition. The Seljuks never recovered, and the empire collapsed not long after. Muslim historians called it the greatest battle in Islam. No place in Khorasan saw more death. And just as this battle shook the Islamic world, news reached Europe too. It was the time of the Second Crusade, and European ears were hungry for the tales of exotic allies. Word spread. In the Far East, a mysterious Christian king had defeated the Muslim superpower. Since they didn't know Buddhism existed, they assumed Yelu Dashi was Christian. They called him Prester John, a mythical priest-king said to rule a vast eastern land. Some believe this legend was inspired by Yelu Dashi himself, because the Khitan were that powerful, because the world mistook them for the rulers of all China. Khitan became Kitai, and that name lived on. Even though the Khitan people eventually disappeared, their name endured, not just in chronicles and legends, but in the language of modern nations like Russia, Kazakhstan, and even in medieval Latin. So while Western Europeans came to know China as China from Qin or China, Eastern Europe and Central Asia remembered it as the land of the Khitan, Kitai. So where does China really come from? The truth is, no single theory has conclusive evidence. What we do know is this: China is a name forged by history, shaped by culture, and whispered across languages. But as one of the four great ancient civilizations, why did China call itself the central country? In early Chinese history, especially during the Shang and Zhou periods, people in the Central Plains called their land Zhongguo, meaning central country. This was a geographical concept distinguishing the central civilized areas from the surrounding barbarian tribes. Other terms used included Huaxia, referring to the elegance and rituals of the central people, Zhongyuan, central plains, Jiuzhou, 9 regions, and Shenzhou, divine land. The earliest known inscription of Zhongguo appears on a bronze vessel called Hezun, dating back to early Western Zhou. It reads, "I shall reside in Zhongguo to govern the people," referring to the central capital region around modern-day Luoyang. During the spring and autumn and warring states periods, various strong feudal states became claiming themselves as the center of civilization, using the term Zhongguo competitively. Over time, Huaxia became a common cultural identifier for the Han Chinese people, emphasizing a shared tradition of etiquette and ritual. In the Qin and Han dynasties, although the official names were Qin and Han, the cultural notion of Zhongguo continued. The Han dynasty expanded the identity of Hanren, which later became the ethnic name for the majority Chinese population. Foreign tribes and neighbors increasingly referred to China as Han. The Tang dynasty saw continued usage of Zhongguo and also spread the name Tang abroad, especially to Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia, where Chinese communities are still called Tang people today. During this time, being Chinese meant observing Chinese rites, culture, not ethnicity, defined Chineseness. In the Song, Yuan, and Ming periods, various states claimed the mantle of Zhongguo. Yuan dynasty expanded the concept to include northern and western territories. The Ming and Qing dynasties referred to themselves officially as Daming and Daqing, but in diplomatic context, they used Zhongguo or Huaxia as a national identity. Thus, while dynasties changed, Zhongguo became a trans-dynastic term symbolizing legitimate rule over the central civilization. Over centuries, it came to represent the idea of a unified cultural political space. The name China, whether as Zhongguo, Huaxia, Kitai, or Serica, tells a story of how people, inside and outside, have understood this ancient civilization. From bronze inscriptions to international treaties, from Qin dynasty's conquest to global trade, this name reflects China's evolving identity. So when someone asks, why is China called China? You can answer, it's a name rooted in history, power, culture, and perception. A name that has traveled across time and continents and continues to carry the legacy of one of the world's oldest civilizations.